The case of Mary Goff. Mary Goff was from County Meath and was described as happy and jolly, but also very quiet and laid back. She was the youngest of 5 children, and her mother was delighted when she was born, finally having a little girl. Mary was described as the glue of the family, a common tribute when a family member has been lost. Mary could hold her own, thanks to having 4 older brothers, but her mother described her as a best friend and confidant, the kind of relationship any mother would want with their daughter. Mary was straightforward. If she was happy, she made it known, and if she was upset, she expressed it. In 1993, at the age of 19, Mary was working at the Huntsman pub in Gormanstown. There, she met a man named Colin Whalen who was 22 years old. He wasn't her usual type, a bit formal and serious, but he seemed to have his life together as he worked in the IT field. In 1995, and Colin hit a rough patch and broke up. Mary didn't know what she had done, and she was distraught. Her mother reached out to Colin for an explanation, but he responded that it was not his concern how Mary was dealing with the breakup and that it was not his fault. This gave Mary's mother her first insight into how heartless Colin could be. Eventually, Mary dusted herself off and focused on her future. She got a great job as a secretary in the production house that created the film Rob Roy. After her contract was up, she was offered a job in Scotland by the same production company, but she turned it down. Speculated to be because she still held a torch for Colin and was hoping to get back with him. After 6 months apart, Mary's wish came true, and she and Colin got back together. This time, the relationship seemed more serious. In 1997, bought a house in Balbriggan on the outskirts of Dublin. And not long after, Mary and Colin moved in together and seemed very happy. In 1998, and her partner got engaged while on holiday. Mary was overjoyed and ready to get married straight away, but the wedding did not take place for another 2 years. On September 9, 2000, the big day finally arrived. However, Mary did not appear to be the radiant bride one would expect. At one point, she was standing outside the church with her new husband and burst into tears, running back into the church. Her family and friends followed her, concerned, but her husband Colin did not. They thought Mary was sad because her father, who had passed away in 1989, was not there. Mary later told a friend that she felt overwhelmed by all the attention and being the center of attention. But there was something else going on behind the scenes. In January 2001, a new year and new beginnings, Mary decided to get herself in order and get organized. She went to a doctor and was eager to undergo the detoxification program she had booked, but Mary would never get to do it. On March 1, 2001, shortly after midnight, a 999 call was made by Colin Whalen. The operator guided him through performing CPR, and the ambulance soon arrived, finding Mary wrapped in a duvet with a towel under her head. The ambulance crew noted that Mary was cold to the touch, which was unusual for someone who had just fallen down the stairs. It only took 15 minutes for the responders to arrive, so she should not have been cold. They also observed that there was blood coming from Mary's nose, but there were no signs of blood on Colin, who was supposed to have performed CPR on her. The position of Mary's body was strange. She was laid out straight, and her head was at an awkward angle with no apparent broken bones. Already, evidence was mounting that all was not as it should have been. Mary was declared dead at Beaumont Hospital in Dublin, and her family were notified and arrived at the hospital. Shortly afterwards, when Mary's mother approached Colin, he had his head in his hands, and she asked how Mary was. Without looking up, he announced that she was dead. Mary's mother was absolutely devastated upon hearing the news that her only daughter had died, and she couldn't believe that Colin had told her in such a cold, emotionless, matter-of-fact way. Mary's sudden death was flagged, and an autopsy was performed by the state pathologist, Dr. Mary Cassidy. Mary had a swollen tongue, hemorrhaging in the eyes, and a mark on her neck, along with carpet burns consistent with being dragged down the stairs, but with no head injuries or broken bones. This led the pathologist to conclude that Mary was strangled to death. But the only confusing thing was, there's no ligature bruising going the whole way around the neck. Just bruising on the left side, which is inconsistent with strangulation. The case was now a murder inquiry, and it landed on the desk of Pat Murray. He brought Colin in for questioning at Balbergen Garden Station the next morning, and he was definitely not acting like the grieving widower. Detective Pat Murray gave no hint to Colin that it was now a murder investigation. And, to make him feel at ease, he told him the interview was just a formality to find out what exactly happened. Colin stuck to his story and admitted he was the only person in the house with Mary when she died. He told that he and Mary were watching TV, and she decided to go upstairs for a shower. And moments later, at around midnight, he heard a thump-thump. He ran to see what was going on, and Mary was at the bottom of the stairs. He went upstairs to grab a towel, as there was so much blood, and wrapped her in a duvet to keep her warm. Investigators informed the Garth family that Mary's death was now being investigated as a murder, but asked them not to disclose this to the family. The forensic team visited the house and found blood on the walls of the bedroom and on the upstairs landing. The phone in the hallway showed no signs of transfer blood or mucus. The team also checked the alarm to determine when it was last activated and found that no windows or doors had been opened after 9:05 p.m. when the couple had arrived home that evening. There were no signs of a break-in, and it was clear that no third party was involved. In their search, they would also uncover a life insurance policy that Colin had taken out on both of them in June 2000, 03/00 before they got married. And shortly after it was approved, he upped the policy to 400,000 Irish pounds. If Colin died, she would receive that amount. And the same if Mary died, Colin would receive it. What was strange about the policy, besides the amount for a couple so young to have such a large policy, it was only valid for 10 years. After that, it would be worthless. A week after the murder, Mary's funeral was held in the same church where he had gotten married 6 months earlier. Of course, Colin pretended to be deeply grieved, which was embarrassing for everyone. The Goff family discreetly overlooked Colin's outbursts so as not to jeopardize the case. The detective soon moved on to Colin's work computer in the bank and completely wiped its history. Fortunately, the bank had backed up all the computers in the office on a secret server. And the detective found was a mountain of evidence. Searches had been made on strangulation, asphyxiation, and the effects of lack of oxygen. Colin had made no less than 22 searches on how to kill Mary weeks before their wedding. They also discovered that Colin was very active on chat sites, using the name Celtic Tackler and describing himself as a widower, a true red-blooded Irish male. One particular contact was with a divorced woman in Wales to whom he had claimed that his wife had died in a car accident. They were supposed to meet in March 2001, and he had told her he was coming into a large sum of money. This poor woman had fallen hard for Colin, and when the detective interviewed her and told her the real story, she would be left devastated. Also, they discovered on Colin's computer research into American killers, and one in particular, Henry Wallace, who was active in the method to kill his victims was to use a towel to wrap around a cord to strangle them as it left no ligature marks. He also kept his victims warm so forensics couldn't determine time of death. This was a huge piece of forensics couldn't determine time of death. This was a huge piece of evidence. The detective combed through Colin's house once again, looking for something that he may have used as a ligature. They tested numerous pieces in the home, but when it came to Colin's dressing gown, they noticed it was overstretched, and tests came back positive for Mary's blood in the fibers of the cord. Imagine Colin wearing the murder weapon around his waist as paramedics worked to save his wife. Meanwhile, the towel he used to disguise the ligature marks was most likely resting under Mary's head. With this amount of evidence, Colin was charged with Mary's murder, and the trial was set for October 2003. Because Colin had to wait 2 years for his trial, he was released on bail. As part of his bail conditions, he had to live with his parents, report to the guard station daily, pay a bail bond, and surrender his passport. He lost his job at the bank. And to have an income, he rented out the house he had once shared with Mary. Although Colin was following the rules of his bail, he had other plans in the background. In May 2002, family reported him missing. A review of the paperwork at Balboa, the detective station, showed that he had not appeared in for 2 days. Essentially, the security guards had failed to properly monitor the situation, and it was unclear whether Colin had actually run away or not. The detective issued an alert, and Colin's car was found at Howth Head, just outside Dublin. The keys were still in the car, and an empty bottle of gin was on the passenger seat. The car was parked neatly, and a window was left slightly open. However, as a formality, an air and sea rescue was launched to search for a body, but surprisingly, no one was found. Alerts were sent out through media, air, and seaports were notified of Colin's identity, and he was wanted for murder. Interpol were contacted, and in turn, Europol, which tracks people within Europe. For over a year, there was no sign of Colin, and eventually, that the detective received a tip-off from a man who was holding in Mallorca, Spain. He was an old-school friend of Colin's, and he knew he was wanted for murder. So he made friends with another barman there and asked who he was, and the barman said that's Cian Sweeney from Galway Island. So when the guy got home, he contacted the detective, and they contacted Europol, and Colin was put under surveillance. An arrest warrant was put in place, and the Spanish police went to the bar and arrested him. He was brought to the civil guard station in Madrid, and Colin denied who he was. Fingerprints were taken, and they matched the prints that the detective had sent over. Eventually, Colin admitted the truth. The next thing to organize was an extradition to bring Colin back to Ireland. This had never been done before. When the extradition was finally arranged, Detective Murray flew to Madrid to escort Colin home. When Mary spoke to Colin, he told her how he had obtained a passport and made his way all the way to Spain. Colin explained that 7 months before he went missing, he had applied for a passport using the identity of a man he resembled in age and build. Knowing this man did not travel, Colin was successful in obtaining the passport. He then took a train to Belfast, a flight to London, another flight to Barcelona in Spain, and finally a boat to Mallorca Island, Spain. Colin returned to Ireland, and Mary's brother was employed at the airport. He positioned himself at the area where Colin would be arriving. One of the security officers approached Mary's brother and asked, "You're not going to attack him, are you?" And the brother responded, "No, I'm not." The security officer then said, "Oh, right." So Colin and Mary's brother came face to face, and they stared at each other for a moment. And then Colin lowered his head. While Colin was waiting for his trial date in prison this weather, the detective were continuing to gather as much information as they could in preparation for the trial. They needed to find out everything they could about him, especially his past relationships. There were people who still believed that Colin was innocent because they didn't have the full details of who Colin really was. One person that the detective found was a woman who had been in a relationship with Colin before he met Mary. He was so violent and controlling that she left the district to get away from him. She met him at a disco, and for the next 6 months he wooed her. But once he had her, he changed. He controlled every aspect of her life, who she was allowed to talk to, and how she was to dress, and he was physically abusive towards her. She ended up pregnant and was terrified to tell him. He hit the roof and told her, no way was she having the baby. He brought vodka and aspirin to her one night and tried to force her to take them so she'd lose the baby. She managed not to take the aspirin, but she did swallow some vodka. At the height of his violence that night, he kneed her in the stomach, and she lost the baby the next day. On the 12th of April, 2005, appeared for the first day of his trial. All the families were there. The Goff family. The Whalens were sitting there believing Colin was innocent. They had no idea what was coming. They thought the guards were out to get Colin and that it was all lies. They really did not have a clue who Colin was. The judge asked Colin to stand and asked him the question, "Did you kill Mary Goff?" And he answered, "Guilty." The Whalen family in the gallery were in shock when he answered guilty. Their jaws hit the floor. It took everyone's breath away. The Goff family was so relieved that they wouldn't have to go through the trial, and Mary's brother said he finally did something right. Colin's counsel read out a letter of apology at the sentencing, but we all know it was self-serving. The only thing Colin Whalen was sorry for was that he got caught. Colin Whalen was sentenced to life in prison where he still is today. He is supported by his English girlfriend, who he met when he was living in Mallorca. She has recently returned to her home in England, so it's easier to visit him. She says she will be with him until the end. Oh, give me strength. Colin Wheeler never loved Mary. In fact, he probably hated her. He took her life so he could start a new one and have the money to do it. If you look at his history, he probably hates all women, and they are only there for his use. The guard, he said, when he gets out, which will be soon, he will be a very dangerous individual to any woman he meets. It's 2022 now, and it's been over 21 years since Mary was murdered. She was a beautiful woman, and her death had a massive impact on the community. Because of Ireland being so small, we have these little communities. So when something like this happens, it's remembered for life. The case of Neil and Twistle. In the peaceful town of Hopkinton, Massachusetts, a family story unfolded in a sad and surprising way, sharing a compelling tale that interested the entire nation. This is the story of Neil and Twistle and Rachel Souza, a story of love, lies, and a tragedy that destroyed the belief in a flawless life. Neil and Rachel are a happy couple with a new baby. Neil is from Britain and works in IT, while Rachel is an American mother who takes good care of their daughter. Despite seeming to have it all, they were actually facing some hidden tensions that led to a tragic outcome. Neil Entwistle was born on September 18, 1978, in Worksop, Nottinghamshire, England, to Clifford and Ivan Entwistle. He grew up in a humble household with his younger brother Russell. His father used to work as a miner before becoming a labor advisor, while his mother worked as a cook in a school cafeteria. After finishing high school, Neil went to the University of York to study electronic engineering and business management. While at university, he met Rachel Souza, an American student studying abroad. Rachel, originally from Kingston, Massachusetts, had attended Silver Lake Region High School before moving to Holy Cross College in Worcester. She spent a year at York University, where she met Entwistle while both were on the rowing team. Neil was described as reserved and not very social, but his peers noticed his quiet nature. On the other hand, Rachel was seen as lively and outgoing, and she was popular in the community. Her American background added a special charm to her personality, making her a positive presence on the rowing team. As their relationship deepened, Neil Entwistle and Rachel Souza found themselves increasingly drawn to each other, spending more time together. Benjamin Pryor, a close friend from their college days, later provided testimony about their relationship, describing their interactions as marked by enjoyment and a strong sense of ease, leading observers to perceive them as a genuinely affectionate couple. While Neil worked at a defense technology and security company in Malvern, Worcestershire, Rachel focused on her career in education. She finished her studies in 2002 and started teaching English, drama, and theater studies at St. Augustine's Catholic High School in Reading, showing her dedication to guiding young minds through the arts. Neil jokingly described his job as making bombs and other items. He happily announced his engagement to Rachel, whom he called the most amazing woman. They met through rowing and were deeply connected. Neil was satisfied with his upcoming marriage, despite not being completely happy about living south of the Birmingham border. In August 2003, the couple got married in Plymouth, UK, and Massachusetts, USA. After their US wedding, they had a reception in the UK in November of the same year. Neil shared the start of their married life in Worcester on a family website he made, sharing memories from their trip to the Mediterranean in Christmas 2004. In April 2005, Neil and Rachel welcomed their daughter, Lillian Rose, into the world, marking a significant turning point in their lives. This new addition to their family prompted them to decide to relocate to the United States. They Carver, Massachusetts, with Rachel's mother, Priscilla Matter's stepfather Joseph, until January 12, 2006, when they secured a home of their own in Hopkinton. Their new residence, nestled on a quiet cul-de-sac with only 8 neighbors, offered a tranquil setting just a short distance from the nearest major city. The 5-bedroom colonial-style rental property came with a monthly rent of $1,500, reflecting the upscale nature of their accommodation. Neil struggled to find a job as a computer programmer and IT specialist, which led to financial difficulties and debt. To ease the situation, he started with different names. During this period, Neil was also running a website called millionmaker.co.uk, promoting a get-rich-quick scheme for the adult entertainment industry. The site claimed to guarantee a monthly profit of $6,000 within 6 months, but was later shut down. Simultaneously, Neil was actively seeking sexual partners through various online platforms. He frequented websites in pursuit of such relationships. Neil registered on Adult Friend Finder and reached out to multiple women via email, expressing his interest in finding sexual partners. During the investigation, authorities discovered incriminating evidence on Neil's laptop, including content from his online profile indicating his interest in meeting American women of various ages. His profile mentioned a desire to confirm rumors suggesting American women's superiority in bed compared to those from overseas. He expressed a mutual desire for a particular type of relationship, implying a straightforward approach to meeting like-minded individuals. In the weeks leading up to the tragic murders of Rachel and their daughter Lillian, Neil conducted a series of disturbing online searches, including inquiries about how to kill with a knife, interspersed with more mundane searches related to employment, travel, and get-rich-quick schemes. Additionally, during this period, Neil visited his father-in-law, Joe Matarazzo, who was a member of the Old Colony Sportsman's Club in Carver, where Neil had previously stored a .22 caliber revolver and received shooting lessons from Joe. Neil devised a plan to steal a gun from Joe's collection. At their home in Carver, Massachusetts, Neil made a trip to his in-law's residence, retrieved the weapon from a concealed location in the house, and drove back with the gun in his possession. Upon returning home, he discreetly concealed the firearm, biding his time for the opportune moment to carry out the tragic acts of violence against his family before taking his own life. On Friday, January 20th, 2006, Neil entered the family's master bedroom, where they had been living for only 10 days. His wife Rachel and their infant daughter Lillian were sleeping in their new 4-poster bed. He crept inside and shot 27-year-old Rachel in the head, then proceeded to shoot 9-month-old Lillian, who was lying beside her mother. The bullet passed through Lillian's tiny body and pierced Rachel's left breast. Later that same day, while his in-laws were still at work, he returned to Carver to return the weapon without cleaning it. He later claimed that he had gone shopping at Staples that Friday, found his family dead upon returning home, and then went to Carver to get a pistol to commit suicide. However, he didn't contact emergency services, revealing a pattern of lies to cover his tracks. Upon leaving Carver, Neil drove to Logan Airport in Boston on the evening of January 20th, 2006. He made 2 ATM withdrawals totaling $800, but 3 additional withdrawal attempts for $420 were declined. The following day, Saturday, January 21st, 2006, Neil purchased a one-way ticket to London, carrying no luggage. Around 5 p.m., he boarded a British Airways flight that departed Boston at 8:15 p.m. On that Saturday evening, Neil had invited several neighbors for dinner. Shortly after 7 p.m., Joanna Gatley and her sister Maureen arrived at the home, but found it locked with the lights on inside. Concerned, they tried calling Rachel's mother, who had also planned to visit that day for lunch with her daughter, but had been unable to reach her. Alarmed, they decided to call 911 around 8:30. Police officers arrived at Neil's home to search for any signs of the missing family. Sergeant Michael Sutton described the scene, noting he could see into the bedroom, where there was a large bed in the center of the room that was unmade with all the bedding appearing to be piled up. Other than the disheveled bed, nothing seemed out of place. After their search, the police locked up the house, left, and continued their patrol. Despite the police search, the Gatley sisters remained deeply concerned. They were so distressed that they decided to spend the night outside in their car waiting for the family's return despite the cold. They made 3 trips to the gas station bathroom to endure the night while awaiting any news. On the following Sunday morning, the sisters managed to enter the house using the garage door code they obtained from a neighbor the previous night. Inside, they discovered dishes and leftovers in the kitchen, suggesting the family had recently finished a meal. The bathtub still held water, indicating that the couple had bathed their infant daughter. They proceeded to the main bedroom and then to Lillian's bathroom, where classical music was playing, and finally checked the living room before Rachel's mother and stepfather arrived. After assessing the situation together, they collectively decided it was time to report the family as missing to the Hopkinton Police Department. Sergeant Sutton returned to the Neil residence for a second search. As he entered the basement, he detected a new, unpleasant smell that was not present the day before. Following the odor through the house, he eventually reached the primary bedroom, where he found Rachel and Lillian, deceased in the unmade four-poster bed, covered with clothes. Rachel's arms were stretched over her infant's chest with her feet curled beside her, and both were dressed in pajamas. The autopsy results revealed that Rachel from a gunshot wound to the head, while Lillian had been shot in the torso. Additionally, Rachel's DNA was found on the gun barrel, while Neil's was discovered on the gun grip. Neil Entwistle, who was 27 years old at the time, was considered only a missing person during this period. Around 36 hours after returning to England, Neil visited his parents, Cliff and Ion. He had been driving around and had spent the previous night at a hotel. During this visit, he disclosed to them that he had discovered the bodies of his wife and daughter. On Monday, January 23, 2006, Neil engaged in a phone conversation with the Hopkinton police. This 2-hour phone call between Neil and Massachusetts State Trooper Robert Manning was recorded and subsequently played in its entirety during the court proceedings. Neil stated that upon discovering the bodies, he was overcome with fear and rushed to be with his family. He recounted to the police, "I covered them with the sheets, and all I could think about were the knives we had downstairs. I took out the large one and held it against myself. I was fearful of the pain it would cause. I just couldn't go through with it. I don't understand why I didn't call for emergency assistance." Failing to muster the resolve to harm himself with a knife, Neil informed the authorities that he drove the family vehicle to his father-in-law, Joe Matarazzo's residence, to retrieve a .22 LR caliber revolver. He claimed to have found the house locked, leading him to choose to return to England to be with his parents on January 26, 2006. U.S. law enforcement officials traveled to the UK to interview Neil the following day, January 27th. After consulting with a lawyer at the workshop residence, he chose not to engage with the American detectives at the U.S. Embassy in London, despite his voluntary presence there. Rachel and her daughter Lillian were laid to rest in Evergreen Cemetery in Kingston, Massachusetts, under the surname Souza. They were interred in a single casket. Despite around 500 individuals attending the funeral to bid their final farewells, Neil was notably absent from the funeral, and his name was omitted from the proceedings and not inscribed on their shared headstone during the burial ceremony. Neil sent a single orange rose and a white lily, with a note attached to the ribbon that read, "My orange rose and my lily for always, signed off with Zakoko." Upon his return to the UK, Neil appeared to be resuming a routine life in February 2006, while media attention remained outside his parents' residence in Workshop. He went to Notting Hill for a dinner gathering with his former crew team from York University, followed by a movie outing about a week after the funeral service for Rachel and Lillian on February 8, 2006. The Middlesex County District Attorney's Office issued an arrest warrant for Neil the following day, on February 9, 2006. Neil was apprehended by the extradition unit of London's Metropolitan Police Service at Royal Oak Station as he was about to board a train. Upon learning of the impending arrest, among his possessions was a notebook detailing his intention to sell his account to the highest bidder. In the notebook, he expressed affection for his orange rose and lily, referring to his wife as his dearest, closest friend. On another page, additionally, he had drafted 2 letters to the editor seeking to share his perspective on the events. Neil aimed to explain his perspective and communicated with a close friend and confidant to convey his intentions. In one of the letters, he inquired about the potential monetary value associated with exclusive rights for his full account. Ultimately, Neil decided not to challenge the extradition order, and he was transported back to the United States on February 15th. He appeared in Framingham District Court, where he was remanded without bail at Middlesex County Jail in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Following this, on March 28, 2006, Neil was formally charged with 2 counts of murder, as well as illegal possession of a firearm and ammunition. Despite the charges, he entered a plea of not guilty in December 2006, nearly a year after the tragic incident. Authorities at Middlesex County Jail, where Neil was detained, discovered letters he had written to his parents and legal team. These letters indicated that Neil was in a state of depression and suggested he might be contemplating suicide. Consequently, he was transferred to Bridgewater Hospital for psychiatric assessment before being returned to Middlesex County. Forensic psychiatrist Christopher Cordless attributed Neil's behavior to Asperger's syndrome, a view that was supported by David Holmes. After several delays, the process of selecting jurors for the trial at Middlesex Superior Court began in June 2008. Concerns were raised regarding the high-profile nature of the case and whether Neil would be able to receive a fair trial. The trial for the double murder officially commenced on June 2, 2008, in Woburn, Massachusetts, with Elliot Weinstein leading Neil's legal team. During the trial, Weinstein unsuccessfully attempted to challenge the prosecution's proposal to introduce DNA evidence. Similarly, efforts to suppress other evidence discovered in the home due to the absence of a warrant were also futile. Neil chose not to present any witnesses or testify in his defense throughout the trial. Observers noted his lack of visible emotion during the proceedings. On June 25, 2008, Neil Entwistle was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder, as well as unlawful possession of a firearm and ammunition. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Upon leaving the courtroom, Neil was overheard reassuring his loved ones in the gallery, saying, "I'll be all right." Initially, Neil was held at Sousa Baranovsky Correctional Center. In August 2008, he fell victim to a deceptive ploy, where he shaved his head in an attempt to seek protection from a white supremacist prison gang. However, instead of receiving protection, the gang threatened his life, stating, "It's a nice gesture on your part, but we're going to kill you." Following this incident, Neil was placed in protective custody, and subsequently in December, he was transferred to Old Colony Correctional Center, a medium-security prison located in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. The Department of Correction confirmed that the transfer was made for Neil's safety due to credible threats against his life. The tragic deaths of Rachel and her infant daughter left a profound emptiness in the hearts of those who knew and loved them. Their passing serves as a stark reminder of the vibrant lives that were abruptly cut short in the aftermath of this heartbreaking loss. The community came together, providing unwavering support and comfort to the grieving families. Their unity and strength during such adversity demonstrate the remarkable resilience and compassion that resides within humanity. The narrative of Neil Entwistle and Rachel Sousa stands as a poignant reflection of the unseen challenges that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly perfect existences. May the legacy of Rachel and her daughter prompt us to remain vigilant, extend a helping hand to those in distress, and cherish every moment spent with our dear ones. Their story serves as a somber yet powerful call to prioritize empathy, support, and appreciation in our interactions with others. Joey LaBute Jr. was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, in 1989. Quiet and reserved even as a child, he grew into an observant, quick-witted adult who tended to be a homebody. He graduated from Ohio State University in 2011 with a degree in financial planning and later worked at Morgan Stanley, living outside Columbus, Ohio, in 2016. On March 4th of that year, Joey was convinced to break his usual Friday night routine of Netflix and video games to join his cousin Stacy and her husband Kyle at the Union Cafe, a popular bar on High Street in Columbus Short North District. The bar was unusually packed that night due to the Arnold Sports Festival, an annual event drawing over 100,000 people to Columbus. After a few drinks, Joey, like many others, became more relaxed and social. While Stacy and Kyle stayed at a table, Joey spent much of the evening mingling, chatting with acquaintances and dancing. After midnight, Stacy felt unwell and wanted to leave but couldn't find Joey. She called and texted him, but he didn't respond, which was out of character for him. Assuming Joey might have stayed at a friend's apartment nearby, Stacy and Kyle went home. Stacy continued calling and texting Joey until 2:30 a.m. but received no reply. While Joey never responded to Stacy, his phone did send one final text message after he was last seen at the bar. This message only added to the mystery of what happened to him. At 1:22 a.m. on March 5th, Joey's phone sent out a one-word text message to one of his friends. The seemingly random string of letters has never been definitively found to have any sort of meaning. Joey's aunt has guessed that it may have been Joey's inebriated attempt to say Jonestown, the town where she worked and had mentioned earlier in the night when she had been texting Joey. A massive effort to find Joey began the Sunday after he was last seen. His family held vigils, and businesses up and down High Street displayed missing persons flyers. Local television stations covered the story, and Joey's picture was shared through social media. Rainy security footage turned over to the police by the Union showed Joey walking towards the bar's exit without his coat, despite the cold temperatures that night. His car was still where Joey had parked it in the lot of the apartment complex he had previously lived in with his ex-boyfriend. His bank accounts were not accessed. His cell phone remained active for approximately 2 hours after he was last seen, and GPS showed that he had remained in the general area of the short north. 2 weeks after Joey went missing on March 29th, his body was discovered in the Scioto River, several feet from the shore, caught on some debris. While Joey's family finally knew where he was, the discovery of his body added even more layers of mystery to the case. Joey's autopsy showed no outward signs of trauma, and the only drugs in his system were alcohol and caffeine. It would be easy to assume that Joey had either committed suicide or drunkenly fallen into the river by accident, but further examination of his body ruled these options out. There was no water found in Joey's lungs, which the coroner's office stated means that Joey was almost certainly dead before he was put into the water. The coroner's office was unable to determine Joey's cause of death. Suicide has been ruled out, and Joey's death was ruled broadly as a suspicious death. Police continue to investigate the case. As of now, however, both the cause of Joey's death and the identity or identities of those involved in it remain unknown. Anna Maciejewska was born in Poland and came to the United States to study at the University of Louisville. She and her husband, Alan Gould, lived in Malvern, Pennsylvania with their 4-year-old son, Andrew. Anna seemed to be living the American dream, building a new home and becoming a successful actuary. Despite her success in a new country, Anna still nurtured her relationship with the land of her birth. She texted and Skyped with her family back in Poland frequently and took on a weekly 2-hour drive so that her young son could attend a Polish class and grow up fluent in her native language. It was her family back in Poland who first noticed that something was wrong in Anna's life in 2017. On March 28th, Anna spoke on the phone with her mother about a planned trip to Poland to surprise her father for his 80th birthday. This would be the last time anyone, save Rihanna's husband, would report hearing her voice. The following day, she sent a text saying she and Andrew would not be coming after all. The day after that, she sent her father a birthday text, but he doubted it was from his daughter. The text was written in Polish but contained basic errors that a native Polish speaker like Anna would not make. After several failed attempts to call their daughter and brief conversations with Alan, Anna's parents called the police in Pennsylvania from their home in Warsaw on April 11th. The same day, Anna's employer, Voya Financial, also reported her missing. Alan Gould reported his wife missing the following day. Anna had used the scheduled vacation time she had taken for her trip to Poland despite not making the trip. On April 3rd, she had sent a text to work saying that she was ill and needed to take 7 days of sick leave, which her co-workers thought was strange. According to Alan Gould, the last time he had seen Anna was on Monday, April 10th, when she left for work at 9:45 a.m. in a hurry because she was afraid she was going to be late for an important meeting. She never arrived at work that day or the next, which was out of character for someone as dedicated to their job as Anna. It was suspicious enough to prompt Voya Financial's call to the police. Anna's cell phone and wallet were left in her home. Her co-workers claimed that Anna never would have left home without her cell phone. On May 8, 2017, Anna's Audi A4 was found near the entrance to some walking trails, 2 miles from her home. Police say some personal items have been left inside, but the discovery of the car did little to push the investigation forward. A 40-person crew of investigators searched the surrounding area 5 days after the car was found, but did not locate anything relevant to the case. Anna's family and friends have been extremely active in the search for Anna, posting flyers, speaking to the media, and participating in physical searches. Despite the fact that they are both cancer survivors and require extensive medical care, Anna's parents make frequent, but physically taxing, trips to Pennsylvania to aid in the search for her. Anna's husband initially cooperated with police, even allowing them to search his home right after Anna disappeared, but he has since stopped cooperating with both the police and the local media who continue to cover the case. After the first anniversary of Anna's disappearance, Pennsylvania State Police announced that they believe that Anna is a murder victim and that they are searching for her body. They have not ruled out anyone as a suspect in the case, including her husband. Twins Summer and Autumn Smith had a difficult adolescence. They had spent 3 years in foster care and had both struggled with substance abuse and mental health issues. They had lived in shelters and collected cans and bottles to use as makeshift art supplies. In their youth, they had supported each other and struggled together, but as they entered adulthood, their paths began to diverge. In 2014, shortly after turning 18, Autumn began to get her life together. She got her own apartment in her hometown of Las Vegas and had been sober for 50 days when she heard a knock at her door. It was her twin, Summer. Summer needed a place to stay, but Autumn suspected she was still on drugs. Autumn asked Summer to leave. Autumn would never see Summer again. Summer traveled to Washington State, where she mainly traveled between the towns of Everett, Marysville, and Linwood. According to acquaintances Summer made in Washington, she was spending time with a dangerous crowd. She was homeless for the majority of her time in Washington. In May of 2014, Summer was discovered sleeping on the living room floor of a home in Marysville. The home's garage door had been left open, and Summer had gone inside to have a safe place to sleep. She allegedly also admitted to the homeowners that she had taken pills she had found inside their house. The last phone call Summer had with her family was on November 19, 2014. By December, the family had begun to worry about her. They could not get her to answer their phone calls, but eventually were able to get her to respond to text messages. However, the text messages were strange and did not sound like Summer. One demanded that the family stop trying to contact Summer. Summer's phone went out of service on December 12th. On January 3, 2015, a man who had been hired to clean a private property south of Lake Stevens discovered a skull on the property. After searching more than 30 acres around the property, police discovered a bag of bloody bedding, a broken knife, and paperwork that belonged to Summer. Tests on the remains that were found confirmed that they were Summer's, but also determined that she had been dead when the strange text messages were sent to her family. They presumably were sent by whoever killed Summer, but who that person is remains a mystery. On October 1, 1993, 12-year-old Polly Klaus Petaluma invited 2 friends for a sleepover. The evening proceeded smoothly until Polly's mother, Eva, was abruptly awoken by intense screaming. She soon discovered that her daughter had been kidnapped by an unknown assailant. Lai Hannah Klass was born on January 3, 1981, in Fairfax, California. Her family comprised her father Mark, her mother, Eva, and her younger sister Annie. When she was very young, her parents separated. Following the separation, Polly and her sister went to live with their mother in Petaluma. Mark subsequently entered a new relationship, and Polly developed a positive relationship with his partner. This arrangement created a harmonious family dynamic, where Polly spent time with both parents without any issues. Polly is often described as a quiet and innocent child. Although she had friends, she was generally shy. However, she found confidence in theater. Polly participated actively in school plays and various musicals organized by her community. Frequently cast in lead roles, her primary aspiration was to become a successful actress in musical theater. Furthermore, Polly had a fondness for sleepovers. She enjoyed having friends over and visiting friends' homes for such gatherings, a regular activity within her social circle. On October 1st that year, when she asked Eva if 2 friends, Jillian and Kate, could come over for a sleepover, her mother readily agreed. That afternoon, the friends arrived at Polly's house and spent the evening there quite contentedly initially. At around 9:45 p.m., Eva decided to go to bed due to a severe headache. Informing the girls of this decision and asking them not to hesitate waking her if necessary, she took 2 sleeping pills and fell into deep sleep shortly thereafter. It was past 11 p.m. when Eva was startled awake by the screams of her daughter's friends. Both girls informed her that a man had broken into the house and taken Polly. Eva immediately contacted the police and checked on her other, Annie, who appeared unaware of the commotion. When authorities arrived, they began questioning Polly's friends. The girls described that they had been in a room, engaged in activities like picking Halloween costumes and indulging in general playful behavior. At approximately 11 p.m., Polly suggested it was bedtime, and her friends agreed. She mentioned fetching an inflatable bed she prepared with her mom so they could all sleep together. Upon opening the bedroom door, they were confronted by a man brandishing a knife. The man did not conceal his face with a mask. Initially, due to the proximity to Halloween, the girls mistook this for a prank and laughed. Realizing it wasn't a joke, they became frightened as the man grew angry at their laughter. He forced them into another room and tied their hands and feet. Inquiring who resided in the house, they all identified Polly as the inhabitant. The intruder then removed pillowcases from nearby pillows, placed them over Jillian and Kate's heads, instructing them to count to 1,000. He assured them he was taking Polly for a brief period, but would bring her back soon. After determining that their captor had left, Jillian and Kate attempted to free themselves. This effort lasted around 30 minutes. Once free, they rushed to inform Eva about Polly's abduction. They relayed this entire sequence to the police and provided a detailed description of the suspect, since he didn't hide his face. This enabled officers to create a sketch of the individual for a media investigation. Evidence at Polly's residence was sparse. Footprints noted were from Polly, her family, and recent visitors only. However, fibers found on the carpet differed significantly from those within Polly's home. These fibers were later identified as originating from automotive carpeting material. Police examined vehicles associated with individuals known to be at the house recently, yet found no match with these fibers, leading them to conclude that they belonged to the kidnapper's vehicle. A palm print was also discovered, but couldn't be thoroughly analyzed due to technological limitations at that time. This detailed account provided critical insight for law enforcement's pursuit of justice in identifying and apprehending Polly's abductor. Back in 1993, advancements in fingerprinting, DNA analysis, and other forensic techniques were not what they are today. As a result, the found palm print with any database was not feasible at that time. However, the print was preserved for future comparisons with potential suspects. In Polly's room, another piece of evidence, a fabric that seemed to be silk, was discovered. It looked like it had been cut scissors from a garment and had a distinctive patterns GYNTH. Police believed this could aid them in future investigations. Additionally, a hair belonging to an unknown individual was found. Although DNA analysis techniques existed then, they were not yet developed enough to be effectively utilized. The search for Polly became one of the largest searches conducted in the United States up to that point. Around 4,000 volunteers joined the efforts, combing through neighborhoods near her home, vacant lots, and large estates in the vicinity. Police attempted to identify drivers who resembled a sketch of the suspect, but were unsuccessful. Officers aimed to find Polly within 24 hours of her disappearance, because finding her alive would become increasingly difficult after that period. The FBI was involved to assist with the investigation, launching their efforts to locate her as quickly as possible. Despite their best efforts, days went by, and hope of finding Polly alive started to wane. Police questioned neighbors about any unusual activity on the night Polly was abducted. Several neighbors reported seeing an odd man wandering around the area, but they did not suspect he would kidnap someone from a neighbor's house, and thus did not alert emergency services. When police shared a sketch based on descriptions from Polly's friends with these neighbors, they all confirmed having seen the man. Officers also spoke with all the teachers and staff at Polly's school. They aimed to find out if anyone knew the man or had any information regarding Polly's disappearance. Alas, no one had any knowledge, and everyone had an alibi for the relevant time period. None of the school staff matched either the sketch or the description provided. The police even compared fibers found in Polly's house with car mats from teachers and staff members' cars, but none were a match. As days turned into weeks, the desperation of Polly's family, authorities, and the public increased. There was a growing fear that the man who kidnapped Polly posed a significant threat to society. This added more pressure on the police to resolve the case swiftly. A reward of $200,000 was offered for information leading to Polly's whereabouts, sponsored by actress Winona Ryder, who held a press conference urging for Polly's safe return. The Polly class case had another peculiarity. In 1993, internet use wasn't widespread, nor utilized by law enforcement for search operations or information dissemination. However, 3 California residents took it upon themselves to leverage this new technology for the search effort. They posted pictures of Polly, sketches of her kidnapper, and reward details online. Their efforts eventually reached an estimated 25 million people in the U.S. via various internet forums and communication channels. While the FBI hoped this would be pivotal in their investigation, it didn't yield significant leads. Despite heightened publicity and numerous tips, investigators lacked solid leads. Weeks elapsed since Polly's kidnapping. Frustration grew among investigators as they were unable to identify the kidnapper or obtain a DNA match from evidence collected. This sense of helplessness persisted until receiving an unexpected phone call. A turning point that held promise, but quickly evaporated into uncertainty. Mark Kloss received a call from someone claiming to be his daughter Polly. The girl stated she was at a hotel and that her captor had just stepped out briefly, giving her a chance to reach out. Unfortunately, the call was abruptly cut short before any additional details could be gathered. Mark promptly went to the police to inform them about the situation. At that time, the FBI lacked advanced tools to trace previously made calls. Consequently, they waited for another call, hoping to trace it. A few hours later, a second call came in from the same girl who had first spoken to Mark. After receiving this call, the police traced it and were surprised when it led them not to a hotel, but to a residential neighborhood. When officers arrived at the identified house, they knocked and soon discovered it was a prank. A teenage girl, similar in age to Polly, lived there, hence the voice resemblance. She explained her friends had dared her. Rather than taking her to the police station, they asked her parents to monitor her activities and cautioned her against making jokes about such serious matters. On November 28, 1993, nearly 2 months after Polly's disappearance, a woman called the police reporting 3 suspicious objects on a large piece of land she owned. The police and FBI who arrived on site found items related to the investigation. A piece of silk, matching one from Polly's room, ballet ties missing since that night, as mentioned by Eva, and duct tape. This discovery led police to speculate that Polly might be in the vicinity. Further investigation revealed new information. On the day of Polly's disappearance, this same woman had reported strangers frequently trespassing on her extensive wooded property, with only a small house and no perimeter fence. The lack of barriers and signage meant many inadvertently wandered onto her land without realizing it was private property. The woman had numerous intruders, but one incident, in particular, stood out. On the night Polly was abducted, a man approached her house in his automobile. His car became stuck in the mud. The nanny, who was caring for the woman's son, first saw the man, but refrained from confronting him due to fear. The homeowner also chose not to approach him, noting an angry expression in his eyes. They then contacted the police. When the officers arrived, they questioned the man about his presence on the property. He stated he was unaware it was private property and expressed willingness to leave quickly, but requested assistance freeing his car from the mud. The officers observed that the man appeared very nervous and scared. He was sweating and seemed possibly drugged. At that time, they lacked the means to conduct a drug test, and since he wasn't being overtly aggressive, they had no grounds for arrest. Consequently, they aided him in extricating his car from the mud, and he eventually drove away. This individual's name was Richard Allen Davis. Richard Allen Davis was born in 1954 in San Francisco, California. His childhood was fraught with violence inflicted by his parents. When Richard was 12 years old, his parents separated. His mother completely disowned him and left him with his father. Richard's father proved to be highly irresponsible, often leaving him alone for extended periods. Sometimes Richard stayed with neighbors or relatives when alone at home became untenable. By his teenage years, Richard started engaging in criminal activities. Stealing things and getting into street fights frequently led to reform school stints. At 17 years old came a significant turning point in Richard's life. He committed a violent robbery that nearly resulted in severe injury to his victim. Faced with two options by the court, reform school or joining the U.S. Army, Richard opted for military service but lasted less than 2 years before receiving a dishonorable discharge due to continued misconduct and poor behavior. As Richard matured, he continued to encounter problems, and his criminal record grew significantly longer. Around the age of 20, he received a 15 sentence for robbery and kidnapping. Despite this, he served only 1 year of the sentence due to parole for good behavior. At that period, Richard was also troubled by another accusation. Many friends believed that he had been involved in the disappearance, a 19-year-old girl named Marlene. Although the police concluded that she had left voluntarily, her close friends were convinced Richard had a role in her disappearance after they attended a party together. These accusations remained unproven and were largely based on rumors. When poorly disappeared, Richard was on probation and did not have a specific address. In response, the police issued a special bulletin exclusively for officers, urging them to exercise extreme caution. They withheld information from the media to prevent Richard from potentially fleeing California or even leaving the country. Ultimately, on November 13, 1993, Richard was arrested while driving under the influence of alcohol, following a routine traffic stop by an officer. He failed a breathalyzer test. Upon inspection of his identity and photograph, the officer quickly realized that this was the individual linked to the Polly Klaas kidnapping case. Proceeding with care, the officer informed Richard that he was being arrested for violating his probation due to drunk driving. Without resistance, Richard agreed and was taken into custody. Once at the police station, officers read him his rights and disclosed that he was actually being detained for Polly Klaas's kidnapping. During an extensive interrogation session, Richard eventually admitted to abducting Polly. The police speculated that his confession might have been made under duress. Evidence collected included his palm print, which matched one found at Polly's house perfectly. Carpet fibers from Polly's house were identical to those in his car's carpet as well. Polly's friends were brought in for questioning at the police station, where they unequivocally identified Richard as her abductor, stripling closure to their distressful ordeal. Another piece of silk, identical to the one found in the girl's room, was also discovered in his car and on the property of the woman who had contacted the police. Everything was against him, so he finally decided to confess. He mentioned that he had been using illegal substances with friends that day and was not feeling well. He made the decision to break into a house in a certain neighborhood to commit a burglary. Richard drove around for some time before arriving in Polly's neighborhood. He noticed an open window in a house and decided to climb in. According to him, he did not plan anything. Never saw Polly, never saw her family, nor followed them. Once inside the house, he looked for valuables, but found few items of interest. Just as he was about to leave, Polly opened the bedroom door and saw him. Richard observed that Polly appeared very frightened, so he ultimately decided to take her with him. He stated that he put Polly in his car, began driving, and after a while stopped at a vacant lot. There, he violated Polly. Following this incident, he resumed driving. When the woman and babysitter saw Richard on private property, Polly was still in the back seat of his car. When police officers helped him pull his vehicle out of the mud, Polly was still alive. This caused much afterwards. Richard said he drove down the highway where he strangled Polly, dug a grave, and left her body there. On December 4, 1993, Richard informed police about the precise location of the grave, where they began their search efforts. 2 months and 3 days after her kidnapping, Polly Klaas's body was located on the side of a highway in a grave dug by Richard himself. Forensic examination revealed little additional information. It confirmed that strangulation was indeed the cause of death, as stated by Richard. Further details could not be determined with precision. However, it is understood that her death occurred roughly around the time she disappeared. Given all the evidence, the man was put on trial for kidnapping, murder, and rape of Polly Klaas. During the trial, Richard had a chance to speak. He not only apologized to the family, but also made a serious accusation against Polly's father, claiming he abused her. Richard stated that she said to him, "Don't do to me what my father does to me." This caused Polly's father to yell and almost stand up to hit him, though he was restrained by others. The defendant's words shocked everyone present, not just because of his accusation and lack of genuine apology, but also because no one believed Polly's father had done such things. Although it wasn't proven, Polly's former partner even defended him. On June 18, 1996, Richard was found guilty of Polly Klaas's kidnapping and murder. In August of that year, he received a death sentence. He attempted to challenge this sentence but failed. Then in 2006, after overdosing on pills in his cell, he was found unconscious, but revived and sent back to prison. In 2009, his lawyer tried appealing his conviction to the Supreme Court, but was unsuccessful. The Supreme Court confirmed that he should be executed. Richard's attorney mentioned plans for further appeals. As a result of these continued appeals, Richard has remained on death row for several years without being executed. There is hope that once all appeals are exhausted within the next few years, the execution will proceed as planned. The case of Brett Ryan. Brett grew up in a prosperous and large Canadian family. His parents, Bill and Susan, had 4 sons. Brett's parents tried to teach him through their own actions. His father held a prestigious job at the Toronto Star daily newspaper and had various hobbies like sports, yoga, and psychology. Likewise, Susan was very hardworking. Their entire household rested on her shoulders. She not only devoted time to her husband and children, but also managed the huge house in Toronto's prestigious area without any help from gardeners or craftsmen. Just like his older brothers, Brett went to university after high school. He always aimed to be better than his siblings, so he advertised painting services in a local newspaper for Toronto residents' houses and fences. Initially, things went well. He made his first earnings and Susan was proud of him, often using him as an example for others. However, making money as a part-time job is one thing. Dropping out of university to spend all your time inhaling paint fumes without proper education is another matter altogether. After some time in university, Brett decided to drop out. For the first couple of years after this decision, Brett still felt confident compared to his older brothers. After a while, when Christopher and Leland graduated and found jobs in their fields, Brett's authority began to fade. Christopher started working for the City of Toronto Transit Commission and Leland, the family artist and designer. Following their studies, they moved out of their parents' home. Brett, to avoid spending part of his earnings on rent, stayed with his father, mother, and younger brother who attended a school for gifted children. With each passing year, Brett grew more desperate due to his mounting debts and his inability to pay them off. He developed depression. By 2007, when Brett was already 26 years old, his debt had ballooned past $60,000. Although Brett was considered an intelligent individual, he didn't know how to effectively use his mind. He always put on a cheerful face and helped everyone around him. He was a participant in volunteer initiatives. Consequently, no one could fathom the depth of despair within him. Eventually, a fateful moment arrived when nothing could be done. On October 28, 2007, Brett had no work orders for house painting or any other tasks around the house. Orders were always scarce in the fall since everyone typically painted their houses in spring or summer. With winter approaching and no prospects for earnings, there was no time to wait. Brett donned all the old clothes he had in his closet, a hat, a long sweater from his older brother, and a scarf knitted by his mother. This particular scarf was comically long. Brett hadn't worn it before, but now found it useful. He wrapped it around his face, leaving only a narrow slit for his eyes, and headed for the bank, located on the outskirts of his neighborhood. Clutching some thick folder, Brett waited for his turn at the bank. When an employee finally summoned him, he approached her and quietly informed her that he had a gun with him. He instructed her to take all the money out of the bank's cash register and give it to him. The girl, shaken with trembling hands, handed him all of the cash from the register. Brett then quietly exited the building to avoid drawing the attention of the guards. Once outside, he ran. Upon counting the stolen money, he realized it amounted to just over $1,000. This sum was far from sufficient to clear his debts. He calculated that robbing about 60 banks would be necessary to meet his financial obligations. Despite how improbable that seemed, Brett saw no alternative. In the initial days following the robbery, Brett was consumed with fear that the police might track him down. To avoid detection, he refrained from going home and informed his mother that he had a job in a neighboring town. Instead, he spent nights in his car, cautiously approaching his house periodically to check if any police cars were hidden nearby. Each visit confirmed silence and no signs of pursuit. This reassured Brett that his plan was working. The success of the first robbery led to more, a second, a third, and a fourth. Each time, Brett took precautions to change his appearance by wearing different clothes, purchased secondhand, or even retrieved from trash and burning them afterward. He also invested in a fake beard from a costume store since bank employees always mentioned his beard in their testimonies. News outlets in Toronto began covering stories about the bearded robber. But despite this notoriety, he never managed to gain substantial amounts through these crimes, the most being just $3,000 per robbery. Brett's hit a snag when police identified his vehicle on surveillance cameras and traced it back to his residence. Lacking solid evidence for an arrest, law enforcement decided simply to monitor him closely. For about 15 days following this new development, Brett refrained from further robberies, even though no more than 3 or 4 days typically passed between crimes before this. His unusual hiatus led some officers to believe they were tailing an innocent person and wasting resources on a dead end. But then fortune turned in favor of law enforcement. Brett left the house, got into a car, and later exited not far from the bank. Wearing a different and unusual outfit, he entered the branch and remained there for some time. Upon leaving, he was immediately apprehended by the police, who announced that the much-discussed bearded robber had finally been caught. Brett had been under investigation for 7 months and was charged with armed robbery. Interestingly, despite having a gun permit, the bearded robber always entered the bank unarmed. He did not even carry a kitchen knife. In total, Brett faced 19 charges and was subsequently imprisoned. Brett and his family filed multiple appeals, which led to only 8 of the 19 counts being upheld. However, Brett didn't stop there. At the first opportunity to apply for parole, he submitted a petition. In it, he requested consideration of his severe depression caused by 2 failed relationships and substantial debt. Additionally, he emphasized that he committed these crimes without intending to harm anyone and without carrying any weapons. His remarks were taken. However, to secure early release from prison, he had to undergo sessions with a psychologist. These sessions had a positive impact on Brett's behavior and mindset while incarcerated. During this period, he did not communicate with his family, but eventually took steps to mend those relationships. The positive changes in Brett were recognized by the commissioners overseeing his case. Consequently, on November 24, 2010, Brett was released from prison. Nonetheless, this hard-won freedom turned out to be more challenging than anticipated. Before becoming known as Brett the Bank Robber, he was simply a painter burdened with personal struggles. Post-incarceration life proved difficult. Few companies were willing to hire an ex-convict with such a tainted background. Even when hired for house painting services, clients would cancel upon recognizing him as the infamous bearded robber. The social repercussions extended to his family as well. Neighbors who once praised Susan's garden began spreading unpleasant rumors about them. The Ryan family decided to sell their house hastily and move to Scarborough, where Susan started cultivating her new garden afresh. Despite these challenges, Brett managed to find employment at a trading company. However, his salary was modest. His parents also assisted financially in helping him rebuild his life and continue his university education. Brett continued to see a psychologist. Each session, the specialist advised him not to sever ties with his family. The psychologist's advice proved effective. However, Brett's financial situation remained precarious. Then, in September 2011, a significant positive event occurred in his life. He met Kristen Baxter. Kristen was an exceptional girl. She owned an apartment with windows that offered stunning view of the sea, which provided the young couple with a picturesque landscape to enjoy. She was also athletic, maintaining excellent physical condition. Crucially, she was unconcerned about Brett's past. As a couple, they traveled periodically and had even visited Australia. Brett's parents were delighted to observe his relationship with Kristen flourish. They were confident that Kristen would encourage him to advance in life and secure his place in society. Life seemed to improve for Brett until his father passed away. This loss profoundly affected him and triggered a return of depressive symptoms. Consequently, he had to increase his visits to the psychologist and spend time supporting his mother, both emotionally and financially, despite his limited resources. Realizing that their relationship needed to advance beyond casual dating, given their maturity, Brett decided to make a commitment to Kristen. He had saved some money and discussed his intentions with his mother. He expressed his desire to propose to Kristen, the goal being a memorable proposal she couldn't refuse. Understanding her son's intention, Susan provided additional funds for him to purchase an engagement ring. Notably, the couple had previously discussed their future together, and it was clear that Kristen did not require an extravagant gift or similar symbols of commitment. Brett's a gold ring adorned with a sizable diamond for his beloved. Naturally, Kristen accepted his proposal. From there, they began planning their wedding. Brett, with all of Kristen's decisions, nodding in approval. However, the rising costs and financial implications unsettled him. He started worrying about his career prospects and financial stability. Determined to secure a stable job, Brett found an engineering position at a prominent tech company online. He meticulously prepared his resume and applied for the job. To his delight, he was invited for an interview and subsequently received a job offer. Elated by the news, Brett shared it with Kristen and his mother. Eager to make a good impression at his new job, he asked his mother for money to purchase an expensive suit. As always, she didn't refuse him. Yet, just when everything seemed perfect, Brett received a disappointing call from the company. Their security team had uncovered details of his criminal past, leading them to rescind their offer. This news hit Brett hard. It was like a bolt from the blue. His spirits dropped immediately. Frustration set in as he considered the futility of ongoing interviews, each ending in rejection due to his past. Faced with repeated setbacks, Brett decided that rather than continuing with futile efforts and investing time in studies that seemed pointless due to his tarnished record, he would use the funds allocated for university studies on their wedding instead. Brett thus found himself back where he had recently escaped from, but kept certain truths hidden from loved ones, including dropping out of university and being rejected from the engineering role. He maintained appearances by dressing in professional attire each morning before heading to paint houses, changing clothes en route. To further sustain this facade among friends and family, Brett frequently updated social media profiles with pictures seemingly originating from an office environment or business events, images sourced off the internet, and would even pretend he's resolving urgent work-related matters during family gatherings by faking phone calls regarding work issues. In September 2016, after a 5-year relationship with Kristen, Brett sought to plan a wedding. He demonstrated a remarkable ability to conceal his true situation, successfully creating the illusion of a stable life. Despite being a common painter, he projected an image of success and prosperity. Brett agreed to rent an expensive restaurant requiring $100 per guest. The entire Ryan family was thrilled seeing Brett's apparent transformation. A prestigious job, a fancy apartment, and an attractive bride. However, the truth of Brett's deceit was far more complex. With the wedding just a month away, Brett needed funds for the event. He repeatedly borrowed money from his mother until she could no longer assist him financially. Desperate, he even demanded that she seek higher-paying employment. Planning his party for August, he invited all his friends and brothers. As the pressure mounted, Brett confided in his counselor about his deceptions. He had been lying to his family for a year about working as an engineer at a technology company. The psychologist expressed deep disappointment and advised Brett to come clean to his mother. Though reluctant, Brett eventually told his mother the truth. Her devastation was profound. She had spent years boasting about her wonderful son. She insisted that Brett also confess everything to Kristen, or she would do it herself. His brothers were already aware of the lies and supported their mother's stance, unable to face telling Kristen the truth himself. A shocking task after barely managing to reveal it to his mother, Brett found himself in an untenable position as the wedding approached. He knew that informing Kristen would prevent the ceremony and considered if honesty might have been better. Facing pressure from all sides, Brett still couldn't admit the truth to Kristen and feared his mother might do so before long. Each time Kristen's phone rang, he tensed up until realizing it was not her discovering the secret, but rather another friend discussing wedding plans. Desperate for resolution and unable to handle the mounting stress any longer, he needed a final solution. He was forbidden to use firearms, so the boy decided that the best way to carry out his plan was to use a crossbow. Besides, it's quite a silent murder weapon. One of his late father's hobbies was bow shooting in the at targets. He taught Brett how to. Yes, was good at target shooting, though was unlikely his late father thought his son with that skill in such manner. Brett bought crossbow and arrows at a sporting goods store and hid it behind the construction debris lying in Susan's garage. At home, he arranged what he thought was an ingenious alibi invention. He tied a spoon to a fan and set the fan on a timer. When the timer went off, the fan turned on, and the spoon moved across the computer keyboard, sending pre-prepared comments to YouTube. From an outsider's perspective, it must have seemed like Brett had spent all day at home watching videos and commenting on them. On the morning of August 25th, Brett, dressed in strange clothes that hid his face, left the house through the back door to avoid security cameras, and took a train to his parents' house. His aim was to eliminate anyone who might disrupt his and Kristen's well-being once and for all. Susan was very surprised at her son's unexpected arrival. She had not been feeling well that day, but Brett, despite his mother's condition, began once again to persuade her, and even demand, that she not tell his future wife anything. The mother categorically refused him. Then Brett began to get angry. Susan sensed something wrong seeing her son's mad eyes, and warned him that she had already called Christopher, and he was on his way. Brett went berserk. He ran to the garage to get a crossbow, but found that his anger and adrenaline overflowed him with such force that he couldn't even make a shot. Instead, he bludgeoned his mother with the butt of the gun, and finally ensured she was dead by tightening a rope around her neck. After throwing plastic bags over the body, Brett loaded the crossbow with arrows and hid in the bushes, waiting for his brother to arrive. After a while, Christopher arrived and started calling for their mother or brother, but received no response. Only an arrow shot from behind, which pierced his neck, causing him to die within minutes. The next victim was Alexander, their youngest brother. As it turns out, Susan had managed to call him too before everything happened. He was also shot in the neck, but either the arrow did not penetrate deeply or it missed vital arteries. Thus, Alexander did not die immediately, but began to scream and call for help. During this time, Leland was in the house sleeping in his room on the 2nd. He had no idea of the carnage occurring in the garage and garden, much less that his own brother was committing the crime. Leland's sleep was disturbed by a scream. Coming downstairs, he saw Brett trying to strangle Alexander. A fight broke out between Leland and Brett. As soon as Leland gained the upper hand and managed to push Brett aside, he ran to the neighbors and called the police. Brett stayed in the house. He had nowhere to run. He realized this was the moment he had completely ruined his life. With nothing else to do, he took out his phone and wrote Kristen a letter asking her to forgive him. When the police arrived at the crime scene, they saw a bloody Brett sitting next to his equally bloody, but still alive brother Alexander, who would later die in the hospital. Brett himself asked the policeman to handcuff him and take him to the station where he confessed everything. Brett also informed them that his mother's body was hidden under packages in the garage, but it was impossible to help her. At both the police station and later at trial, Brett admitted that he did not intend to kill Susan. His plan was merely to scare her. However, he did plan to kill Christopher and Alexander that day since they were witnesses. And if they hadn't arrived, they would still be alive. Almost 10 years ago, he tried justifying everything with his depressive state, but it did not soften his sentence. Despite acknowledging that Brett confessed everything on his own accord and did not hinder the investigation in any way, the judge sentenced him to 3 life terms, 1 for each murder, with parole eligibility in 2041. As for Leland, he is not speaking to reporters, but is known throughout Toronto as the sole survivor of that dreadful incident. Dr. Robert Smith lived a privileged life in apartheid-era South Africa. He attended Oxford on a Rhodes Scholarship before returning to South Africa to earn a PhD in economics from the University of Pretoria, later working to defy international sanctions against the country. At 34, he became the youngest ever Deputy Secretary of Finance in South Africa's Treasury Department and later served as the country's ambassador to the International Monetary Fund in Washington, D.C. In 1977, Dr. Smith, whose primary residence was in Pretoria, rented a home in the town of Springs to run for election as the area's Member of Parliament. If elected, he was expected to secure a high-level position within the National Party government, potentially as finance minister. The whites-only election was set for November 30th, 1977, and Smith was anticipated to win easily. On the evening of November 22nd, just after 6 p.m., Smith's wife, Jean Cora, was driven to their Springs home by the family's driver, Daniel Shabalala. Daniel prepared dinner while Mrs. Smith watched television. She walked Daniel out of the house just before 7 p.m. and locked the door behind him. Shortly after, she called her husband's receptionist to ask if he was still at his campaign office, as guests had arrived to speak with him. Dr. Smith left his office just before 8 p.m. At 7 a.m. the next morning, Daniel Shabalala discovered the bodies of both Jean Cora and Robert Smith. They had been shot multiple times and stabbed. The word Rayadum was written across the kitchen cabinets in red spray paint, and Dr. Smith's briefcase was missing. Based on autopsies and the locations of the bodies, police theorized what happened that night. Mrs. Smith had died several hours before her husband and was found near the phone. Based on the locations of her injuries, it appears that after she hung up the phone with her husband's receptionist, she turned around and was shot holding her hand up to her face before she fell. Dr. Smith was shot as he entered the home around 9 p.m., once to incapacitate him and then twice to the head. Mrs. Smith had been stabbed 14 times post-mortem with a stiletto knife, which was then thrust into her husband's back. It has been theorized that the stab wounds were inflicted and the odd words written some 2 hours after Dr. and Mrs. Smith were shot. It is believed that these actions were taken to cover up the fact that the killings were political assassinations because they made the killer look like an unstable and deranged person. The meaning of Rao Tem has been highly speculated about but has never been deciphered. While it is believed that there were multiple killers involved in the crime, Mrs. Smith spoke of guests at her home that day, and the fatal bullets came from 2 different types of gun. The identities of those killers remains unknown. It is widely believed, however, that Dr. Smith was killed by South Africa's Bureau of State Security at the behest of his own political party, the National Party. Several cabinet members and members of the security force have been accused over the years of having played a role in the murders, but not enough evidence has ever been found to bring criminal charges. The most long-standing theory for the crime has been the belief that Robert Smith is about to go public with information about wide-scale financial fraud within the South African government. It has been alleged that he uncovered everything from offshore accounts made up of money siphoned off from the government budget to state-sanctioned payouts made to U.S. senators and CIA agents. If there were any evidence of such wrongdoing on the behalf of the National Party government, it presumably vanished in Dr. Smith's briefcase. The Smith son and daughter, Liza and Robert, testified to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission after the fall of apartheid in hopes that the commission could help uncover the reason why their parents were killed. In their final report, the TRC declared that Robert and Jinkora were killed by members of South African security forces and that their deaths were a gross violation of human rights. They could not identify the exact perpetrators or the true motive of the crime. Liza Smith released a book in 2018 detailing her own investigations into her parents' case and the troubling behavior she's encountered from government officials because of them. Jane Marie Pritchard loved the outdoors since her childhood. which was spent on her parents' 38-acre farm in Maryland. She was close with her family, but also strongly independent, driving across the country alone after she finished college. She inherited her mother's love of plants, so it was no surprise to those close to her when she decided to pursue a master's degree in botany. She was enrolled at the Graduate School of the University of Maryland while also working at a botanical garden. Jane's thesis focused on a summer vine known as a hog peanut, specifically on the way the vine's leaves would turn towards the sun. Her research required Blackbird State Forest in Delaware. She was months away from finishing the thesis and receiving her degree. On September 20th, she arrived at the state forest by 7 a.m. and set up her equipment behind her truck, extending some 30 feet into the woods. At 5:30 that afternoon, a couple from Perth Amboy, New Jersey, taking a walk around the forest discovered Jane's partially clothed body 20 feet away from her extensive research setup. She had been shot in the back with a shotgun. She was only 28 years old. There had been a large number of hunters in the forest that day, so at first glance it appeared that Jane's death could have been an accident. However, the fact that she was found partially clothed pointed to a much more sinister scenario. Perhaps someone had tried to sexually assault her and then shot her when she tried to run away. Police had little to go on early in the case. They searched Jane's blue and white Chevrolet Blazer for evidence but had no success. Their most useful piece of evidence proved to be Jane's field notebook. Jane had kept minute-by-minute notes of her research. The notes abruptly stopped right before 10 a.m. This allowed investigators to pinpoint a time for the crime and better utilize eyewitnesses. Over 300 people were interviewed in relation to the murder. A man called police the Monday after the murder to tell them he had been hunting squirrels in Blackbird State Forest on the day of the murder. At around 10 a.m., the time when Jane's field notes stopped, he had seen Jane talking to another hunter. He helped develop a composite sketch of the man. Police grew suspicious of the squirrel hunter because they claimed there were inconsistencies in his story. In October 1986, the witness was arrested and charged with Jane's murder and held without bail. A single foreign hair had been found at the crime scene, and police hoped that forensic testing would prove that the suspect they had in custody was in charge as him. Charges were dropped against the hunter, and he was released from prison. No other suspect has ever emerged in the case. A plaque in Jane's memory was placed in the gardens where she worked, and one of her professors completed her thesis for her. A cold case unit reopened Jane's case in 2015, but as of 2018, her killer has never been brought to justice. Matthew Pendergrass grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. He was only 5'6" tall and 115 pounds, but he still excelled in athletics, serving as goalie for his soccer team and running varsity cross country in high school. When he enrolled at Rhodes College in Memphis, Tennessee, he planned to take a pre-med course of study so that he could follow in his father's footsteps and become a doctor. However, his plans changed when he took a Spanish class that included a trip to Mexico. He was inspired after the trip to change his major to Spanish. His plans further changed after he spent 2 summers volunteering with orphans in the Dominican Republic. His new life goal was to start his own foundation to better the lives of orphans. He planned to move back to Atlanta after he graduated to work at a nonprofit to learn the business side of such a venture. On Friday, December 1st, 2000, Matt was just 2 weeks away from graduation. He had plans to go on a cruise with the family of a friend of his after they finished school before he and his friend would become roommates back in Atlanta. Matthew had been up late the night before, in part because he had acted in a play as part of a course, and in part because he was working on a final paper. He had spoken with his friend Gio sometime between 1:30 and 2 a.m. about how best to outline the paper. Around 7:30 a.m., Matt left Gio a message that everything was fine and that he would talk to him later. Matt had a Spanish class that morning at 9 a.m. in a building just a short distance away from the room he rented. However, his landlord heard him leaving between 7:30 and 8. The following afternoon, Matt's mother, Mary Ellen, received a phone call from a man asking for Matt. The man, Joe Murdaugh, explained to Mary Ellen that he had gotten her phone number off of an old oil change receipt in her son's glove compartment. Matt's Toyota 4Runner was parked off of a private road on a levee in a private duck hunting preserve in Minot County, Arkansas, roughly 2 hours west of Memphis. Joe had not seen the vehicle when he had begun hunting at 10 a.m. the day before, but when he was back on the road at 2 p.m., he had seen it and left a note asking its owner to remove it from his property. When the car was still there after a day had passed, he began to investigate. The car was unlocked and the keys were in the ignition. There was no sign of Matt by the car. In a subsequent search of the area, Matt's clothes, a shirt, jeans, socks, and shoes were found a short distance away. The clothes were found folded neatly in a pile, a detail his mother finds suspicious. Matthew is notoriously sloppy, so if he had discarded his clothes, they probably would have just been tossed aside, she argues. To her, the pile of clothes suggests that the scene was staged by someone else. The other major piece of evidence that raised concerns were Matt's journals, which were found inside his backpack in the 4Runner. They contain various writings and poems about nature, death, immortality, and a group of silver elves. On the surface, these entries seem to indicate an unknown problem in Matt's life. He was at the right age to start showing signs of schizophrenia or want to start experimenting with drugs, either of which could have produced hallucinations that may have led him to wander into the woods. There are two facts that lead those close to Matt to dismiss the idea that these journals were significant in Matt's disappearance. The first was the fact that Matt was very creative and liked to write, and the second was the existence of an actual group known as the Silver Elves. Elves identified as actual elves, and their online presence at the time promoted a variety of mystical and esoteric views. Matt played an online multiplayer video game through a website that had some links to this group, so it is conceivable that he found the Silver Elves website and was simply working through some of their themes in his writing. One entry in particular, however, is still concerning even with this context. Matt writes about the cold mud in the woods, lying down in icy water and feeling his blood turn into ice crystals. Matt's vehicle was found near the Bayou Metro, a large waterway whose waters were rushing near the site in question. Divers did not find anything in their search of the bayou. However, trained dogs were able to pick up Matt's scent going from the pile of clothes left behind to the edge of the water. They could not pick up his scent leading from the car to the clothes. No other sign of Matt was found in the area despite extensive searches, and the case of Matt still remains a mystery. Harilyn Wasilewski was just 14 years old in 1954 but lived an edgier life than most young women her age. She bleached her hair and wore heavy makeup and wore clothes considered short and tight for the 1950s. Carolyn was spirited and gutsy, always looking for new sources of excitement and fun. She was a member of the Drapes, a rockabilly gang in the vein of the Pink Ladies or T-Birds from the musical Grease. The Drapes stayed out late and committed petty crimes but were really only dangerous and that they rebelled against the standards of how respectable young people were supposed to behave at the time. Most of the trouble Carolyn would get into will be considered par for the course of navigating adolescence today. While she lived a very adult lifestyle, she would never have the chance to actually enter into adulthood. On November 8, 1954, Carolyn told her parents she was going to meet her friend Peggy and then go to the local elementary school to register for dance classes. Carolyn was wearing a tight pink shirt, a black patterned skirt, and a black denim jacket. Her hair was in curlers covered by a scarf. Her outfit seemed out of place for an elementary school, and a quick errand hardly seemed like it would require curling her hair. While her parents suspected Carolyn was not being truthful with her plans for the evening, they let her leave their house on Mardell Avenue in Baltimore at 6:15 p.m. When Carolyn did not return within a few hours, her parents began to worry. They were used to Carolyn's rebellious behavior, but it was not like her to stay out all night. They began to search the neighborhood for her and discover that she had not made it to Peggy's home or to the elementary school. No one would know where Carolyn was until 7 a.m. the following morning. A train engineer on an express train running from Harrisburg to Baltimore noticed something on the tracks up ahead of the train near the Belvedere Bridge, roughly 8 miles from Carolyn's home. The train diverted when the engineer began to fear that the object was a body. Tragically, he was correct. It was the body of 14-year-old Carolyn. Written on her right thigh and lipstick was the name Paul. When she was found, Carolyn was missing her shoes and skirt, but her autopsy revealed that she had not been sexually assaulted. It also determined that the cause of her death was a skull fracture. She had not been killed where she was found, and police theorized that she had been thrown onto the tracks from the bridge in hopes that passing trains would damage the body enough to hamper the eventual murder investigation. The site of the actual murder was quickly determined, and some of Carolyn's clothing, covered in blood, was found in a lot near her home. Police were not able to ascertain the significance of the name written on Carolyn's body or why someone would have taken the time to write it on her in the first place. Police quickly had 2 male suspects in the case, but neither of them was named Paul. The first was a man Carolyn had just testified against in court in a sexual assault trial, but he was able to provide an alibi for 11 p.m. on the 8th, the time at which the medical examiner believed Carolyn had been killed. The second suspect was a man named Ralph Garrett. Garrett was a 45-year-old married man. He lived close to Carolyn's home. A witness reported seeing him talking to Carolyn the night of the murder. The same day he was announced as a formal suspect in the case. Garrett committed suicide. He hung himself with a belt across the street from the lot where Carolyn had been killed. Police did not believe that Garrett's suicide had anything to do with the case. Garrett's mother had passed away recently, so they argued that the timing of his death was purely coincidental. Carolyn's killer, as well as the purpose of the writing on her body, remain unknown. Rose Burkert, 22, and Roger Atkinson, 32, both lived in St. Joseph, Missouri. Rose was a single mother, trained to become a nurse, and Roger was a telephone crew worker. Despite the fact that Roger was married, the two were involved in a romantic relationship. On Friday, September 12, 1980, the pair decided to spend the weekend together. Roger's wife, Marcella, was told that the time he was actually spending with Rose was part of a 2-week work trip. They ended up near Williamsburg, Iowa, looking for a hotel room to share. They attempted to get a room at the Amana Holiday Inn along Interstate 80, but were originally told that the hotel was at capacity due to a mortician's conference being hosted there. The desk agent double-checked the register and realized that there had been a last-minute cancellation, leaving room 260 available. Rose and Roger checked into the room at 7:40 p.m. The following day, a maid knocked on the door of room 260 but got no answer. Finding the door locked, she retrieved a passkey and entered the room. The sight she discovered could only be described as gruesome. Blood spatter covered the headboard and the walls, and the bodies of both Rose and Roger were lying face down in the bed. Their subsequent autopsies would show that they both died from extensive head trauma after being beaten with a hatchet or a similar instrument. Roger's hands showed extensive defensive wounds. The room had several odd clues. There were 2 chairs set up near the bed, and there were indications that someone had put their feet up on the nightstand. Near one of the chairs was a pile of soap shavings, apparently from someone whittling down a bar of soap. The soap was then used to write on the mirror in the bathroom. Originally, a longer message had been written but had been smudged away with only the word "this" left decipherable. There was also toothpaste splattered in the bathtub. There were assumptions made in the investigation about who could have carried out the crime that I personally do not agree with. It has been argued that Rose and Roger knew their killer because there were no signs of forced entry and Roger was found wearing only his boxer shorts, arguably because he felt comfortable around the killer. It has also been argued that the chairs could have been set up by the bed because Roger and Rose had chatted with the person or people who killed them while they were still alive. This scenario does not make sense to me personally. I know that I may just be more self-conscious and reserved than other people, but the idea of sitting in bed in my underwear with the person I am having an extramarital affair with while casually chatting with a friend is completely absurd to me. No matter how close I am to someone, this scenario would just never happen. To me, it makes much more sense that either an employee of the hotel with access to the passkey or someone who figured out how to steal a passkey entered their room after Rose and Roger were asleep and committed the crime, moving the chairs afterwards. The television had been on when the maid discovered the bodies, but plenty of people either fall asleep while watching TV or intentionally leave it on to drown out outside noise. Either of those 2 things happening seems infinitely more likely than Roger answering the door and socializing in his boxer shorts in bed with his mistress. There have been attempts made to link this crime to similar killings in other parts of the country, but no solid connection has ever been made. To me, this may be due in part to the inexperience of the killer. The overkill could suggest a personal motive, or it could suggest a killer who did not know how much effort it would take to finish the crime. The message on the mirror shows insecurity on his or her part. They had something they thought important enough to write, but then changed their mind and got rid of it, but still left the single word on the mirror. The killer may have sat near the bodies purely because they enjoyed the sight of what they had done, or they just may never have seen dead bodies before. This inexperience may mean that even if the killer went on to commit other crimes, they were still developing patterns behaviors around them, making them difficult to trace back. Rose allegedly had a fight with the bartender at the hotel the night she checked in. The following day, the bartender left town without collecting his paycheck, abandoned his car, and enlisted in the armed forces and got deployed to Germany before authorities had a chance to speak with him. He has largely been discredited by police as a serious suspect in the crime. While his motive does seem trivial, especially relative to the brutality of the murders, he is the only suspect who definitely knew where the couple was staying and could have gained access to their room. The other two major suspects in the case are popular because of how violent they were, but practical concerns make it improbable that either of them perpetrated the crime. Roger's uncle-in-law was serial killer Charles Hatcher, who escaped from a mental health facility in Nebraska around the time of the murders. There is, however, no evidence that Hatcher ever left the state of Nebraska, as he was arrested there a few weeks later. Furthermore, his preferred victims were young boys. There is also no way he would know that Rose and Roger would be at that specific hotel. Roger's connection to Hatcher is probably simply coincidental. The other suspect is Rose's ex-boyfriend, who was a violent drug addict who was stalking her and may have been responsible for the grisly death of the dog. Rose stalking her and may have been responsible for the grisly death of the dog Rose had gotten to protect herself and her child. He has an obvious motive, but he had what police considered to be a solid alibi. He also passed a polygraph, although that does not necessarily prove anything. Like Hatcher, the major problem with him as a suspect is how we would know where Rose and Roger would be that night when they themselves did not know where they would be staying right up until when they checked in. It is unknown who originally was booked in room 260 that night and if anyone had a motive to harm them. To me, this could potentially be an important avenue of investigation in solving this case that has been cold for almost 40 years. Please let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with me about my thoughts on this case. The case of Ligas Gramain. India is the only country in the world where cultural and religious traditions have not been interrupted since ancient times, which is probably why it attracts tourists from all over the planet. But in our story, we will look at India like a coin that has a different image on each side. On April 20th, 2018, at dawn, two young men went fishing down the river toward a mangrove forest. They took a long boat ride downstream until they reached a remote and quiet place. One of them jumped into the water to tie up the boat, but his attention was distracted by a pungent, acrid odor that was very close by. They went ashore and followed the odor. Curiosity led them to a horrifying find. There was something that looked like a human body hanging on a tree branch and a skull lying nearby. The guys abandoned the boat and rushed to the nearest village to report the terrible find. A team of investigators, forensic experts, and police officers urgently arrived on the spot. The experts confirmed that the suspended body was indeed human. It was obvious that it had been hanging for a long time and had already begun to decompose. The flesh on the arms and legs had torn off, and the skull was found nearby. Next to the body were packs of cigarettes, packaged drinking water, and a lighter which probably belonged to the victim. An investigation was conducted at the scene the same morning. The evidence found was seized, and the remains were sent for examination. The modest remnants of clothing that could be identified on the victim revealed that Ligas Gramain, a 33-year-old hiker, was the victim of an accident. But who is Ligas Gramain, and what happened to her on the riverbank? Ligas Gramain was born in Latvia in 1986. She grew up in a large and friendly family, had an older brother, and a younger sister. The sisters were very friendly and from childhood shared all joys and hardships with each other. Growing up, Ligas moved to Ireland, but always maintained close relations with her family. It was in Ireland that she met Andrew Jordan. It was not love at first sight, as the modest Legay had difficulty in communicating with new people. But after 5 years, Liga and Andrew turned into a married couple who made great plans for the future. Despite the fact that Liga worked in a hotel and led a modest lifestyle, she dreamed of opening her own center of yogic retreats in Portugal. Andrew supported his beloved's idea, and together, they saved money for 4 years to fulfill their dream. But fate had other plans. In was experiencing the effects of an aggravated skin disease that was causing physical and mental discomfort. To help her sister overcome this ailment and restore her emotional state, her sister Ilsa invited Liga on a trip. So in February 2018, an ILS traveled to Tiruvananthapuram, the capital of Kerala, so that Liga could receive Ayurvedic treatment for depression. Kovalam is the premier Ayurvedic resort of Kerala in India. Kovalam, which means grove of coconut palms in Hindi, is a small village offering everything you need for a comfortable and complete rest and treatment. Ayurveda is the oldest system of medical knowledge, which originated more than 5,000 years ago. Ayurveda is based on the universal laws of nature, on the unity of all things in this world. Ayurvedic programs help a person to restore balance and harmony in the body. Panchakarma is the best Ayurvedic program for modern man in Kerala. Panchakarma helps to reboot the body effectively. Most of those who have undergone the Panchakarma course in Kerala repeat it annually, and it is not without reason, as regular Panchakarma not only allows us to get rid of extra pounds, but also adds a couple of decades of healthy life. Since 1985, has been recognized by the World Health Organization as the most effective system of alternative medicine in the world. Let us emphasize that all the promised benefits of Ayurveda are only an alternative, not a panacea for healthy longevity. The 33-year-old Ligar and her sister came to Kerala in search of spiritual enlightenment, hoping to be cured of depression in one of the Ayurveda centers. Their treatment tour was scheduled for 6 weeks and included yoga classes, meditation, therapeutic herbal drinks, and nutritional and massage recommendations. The sisters were treated together at an Ayurvedic clinic at Kovalam in Kerala and have already completed their course. On the morning of March 14th, refused to go to yoga class with her sister, explaining that she had a headache. When Isla returned to her room, Liga was not there. With the help of the hotel staff, Liga was able to find out that her sister left the hotel around 30 a.m., wearing leggings and a yoga t-shirt, hired an auto rickshaw, and went to Kovalam Beach for a walk. The beaches around Kovalam are popular destinations for both domestic and international travelers. The sandy beaches of Kovalam are always crowded. However, Liga could not be found there. Liga wandered the beach until late at night, showing her sister's picture, but never heard the long-awaited response that someone had seen her. This was actually strange, as Liga was a tall white girl who definitely stood out, and if she was actually on the beach, someone should have seen her. After searching unsuccessfully, Isla went to the police station to report her sister missing. However, the Indian police officers did not show any sympathy for the missing foreign tourist. On the contrary, they complacently asserted that they would surely find the girl who had strayed, or that she would surely return the next day. They were not even deterred by the fact that Liga, according to her sister, had psychological problems and could be an easy target for criminals. The police registered a case, but the investigation started coldly, or rather, it is more correct to say, did not start at all. Liga had traveled extensively in Kerala, visiting Kollam, Verkala, and finally came to Kovalam. She considered herself a very experienced traveler in India, and this time, she took her sister with her to show her the India she loved so much. But the trip turned tragic. After a few days of inaction by the Indian police, Liga started searching on her own. She enlisted the help of friends and also reported Liga missing to her husband, Andrew, who flew urgently to India. The police investigation intensified after the missing person's husband, Andrew Jordan, and Liga contacted the local press and started an online campaign to find her. Liga also reached out via Twitter to India's Foreign Minister, Sushma Swaraj. Please help. My sister, a Latvian citizen, has been missing for 8 days. We are very worried, she wrote. The desperate sister announced a reward of 100,000 rupees to anyone who could help find Liga or provide any information about her movements that day. Liga and her friend Alexa, who had also traveled to India after hearing about Liga's disappearance, put up posters in the Kovalam beach area where Liga was last seen. Together, they put up flyers and distributed them to people. Numerous locals took an active part in the search for the missing tourist. The important fact remained that Liga suffered from depression and had a hard time interacting with strangers. On the day of her disappearance, she hired an auto rickshaw to reach the beach and was never seen again. She had about 8,000 rupees with her, but no passport, so she could not leave the country. Ashok Kumar, head of the local police station, said that the police had no leads in the case. The police kept saying that the tourist had gone on a bender or eloped and would soon return on her own. However, regular, persistent requests for help from Liga and Andrew forced the police to search for Liga. The search operation was conducted in the Kovalam beach area, where Liga Scani was last seen. Police assumed that she had drowned, just as the unidentified body of a woman was found washed ashore at Kakal, in Kanyakumari district. Investigators examined the body along with the missing woman's sister, but the latter did not identify it as her sister. The version of drowning was not confirmed, and the search for Lager continued. Andrew, on the other hand, was convinced that his wife had been kidnapped by local gangs for the purpose of selling her. He tried to infiltrate these gangs to get more information, but was exposed and warned that repeated contact with the gangs would result in him having to leave the country. A month after Liga went missing, there were still no leads to help find the girl. Liga continued to look for her sister. She visited Kovalam beach every day and watched people. On one such day, she spotted a boat, and she had a theory. The only way to leave the beach unnoticed was by boat. On April 17, 2018, after a forced hiatus, Andrew returned to India to continue his search. Liga and Andrew entered a new struggle to find Liga Skramina, but her body was still not found. The search was complicated by the fact that Liga was a tourist and a citizen of another country. The Latvian Foreign Ministry said the embassy was in constant contact with Liga's relatives and was also working closely with the Indian police. The Latvian embassy also appealed to the Indian Foreign Ministry with a request for special support in the search for Liga, as well as the honorary consul of Latvia in India, whose consular district includes the region where Liga disappeared. At the request of the Kerala state government, the Indian Navy and Air Force joined the search for the missing Latvian citizen. The search operation involved NN-32 transport plane, Gemini inflatable boats, underwater sonar, and 5 deep-sea divers. But even this extensive effort did not bring the desired result, and Liga remained missing. The search continued, and by this time, all local residents knew about the missing tourist from Latvia. They supported and sympathized with Andrew and Liger. On April 20, 2018, Phone received the longest-awaited yet most horrific call of her life. A body had been found in the mangrove jungle. She and Andrew drove to the designated spot where the police were waiting for them. For the boat crossing, Liga's heart was pounding like never before. She felt that for the moment, she would have to swim the path that Liga had traveled to her demise. On the spot, horror overwhelmed her. Liger saw her sister's clothes. She recognized the shirt and leggings on the body, but the jacket and shoes did not belong to Liger. It remained unclear how, with whom, and why Liga had gotten to a place that could only be accessed by going through Panader from Samudra Beach. 2 women confirmed that they had witnessed Liga traveling alone into the mangrove forest. But why would a girl who was being treated for depression and already alone take a boat to a remote place in the forest? The body was shifted to the medical college hospital, where it underwent an autopsy which was captured on video camera. The police said they could not confirm the identity of the body until DNA analysis was completed. According to the city police commissioner, the body was badly mutilated, with the head lying nearby. Police tentatively identified the dead woman as missing tourist Liga Skramina. In favor of the investigators' conclusions is also the fact that Liga's relatives identified the victim by her hair and clothes. One of the versions put forward by rescue services in India was poisoning. There are poisonous pong-pong trees in the mangrove forest, and she could have accidentally or intentionally eaten their fruit and poisoned herself. Between 1989 and 1999, more than 500 people died from poisoning by its fruits in Kerala alone. However, this theory seemed nonsensical because the person was found hanging upside down, but there was no head. It is obvious that if Liga had been poisoned, her body would have been in a completely different position, and the head would have been in place. The Indian authorities were talking utter nonsense. Based on the information about Liga's complex psychological problems, the investigators also considered the possibility that Liga had voluntarily taken her own life. Liga feared that the police would try to pass off her sister's murder as a voluntary departure from life. Although a rope had been found at the scene, and it could be concluded that the hiker had hanged herself, Liga demanded a separate explanation for the missing head. "Don't tell me it's lost," Liga said sarcastically in yet another appeal on the internet. Breathlessly, Liga and the anxious public waited for the results of the forensic tests. The forensic results were overwhelming. The report stated that there were areas of blood pooling in part of Liga Scraman's brain, as well as bruising in the neck area. The autopsy revealed that the woman had been strangled by several people and was killed in an attempted violent attack. There were external injuries on the body, probably sustained during the struggle. However, the fact of violence could not be definitively confirmed, as the body was in the decomposition stage. There were characteristic injuries on the cartilage in her throat, which indicated that someone had forcefully squeezed her throat. The trauma was severe enough to be fatal, according to forensic experts. There were blood clots in her brain, which confirmed strangulation. They also noted that there were bruises on her neck and legs. A total of 9 wounds were recorded on Liga Scramani's body. In view of the above, the police no longer considered the version of voluntary death. According to the autopsy, it was determined that Liga was murdered after resisting or struggling. Ilse breathed a sigh of relief and hoped that the police would soon find her sister's killers. But there were complications as well. As part of the investigation, the police began checking out local drug dealers and card players. In addition, during interviews with local residents, 2 women said that they saw Liga walking alone to the place where her body was later found. But the police said they did not fully trust their words. Meanwhile, Liga's relatives have accused Indian police of incompetence, claiming that if the girl had been searched for immediately, the tragedy could have been avoided. The 33-year-old Latvian tourist is believed to have been grabbed from a nearby beach and transported by boat before being strangled. A special team of investigators has begun looking for those responsible for the crime. About 40 suspects were interviewed. However, arrests were planned to be made a few days later, after the law enforcers had enough evidence. The Indian police conducted an investigation that led to the arrest of 2 men, who were eventually accused of killing Legos Grimine. Police revealed that Ligas Griman was lured by 2 men, who then abused her before dismembering her body. The alleged assailants, who are now in custody, are local dealers in illegal substances. The suspects fully confessed under torture. Both the accused were pimps and were also dealing in illegal substances, police said. The autopsy did not reveal much evidence, because Luger's body was badly decomposed. Andrew Jordan filed a petition in Superior Court for a review of the felony murder case. He believed that more people were involved in the woman's murder. In the petition, he pointed out that both defendants later recanted their pleas of guilty to the crime. According to Jordan, the men may have confessed because they were tortured, which, as it turns out, is a common practice in India. However, the Supreme Court of India denied the murdered woman's common-law husband, Andrew Jordan, a review of the case due to lack of direct evidence. The trial was postponed for 2 months, but Andrew was outraged by this attitude of the authorities. He had earlier accused the Kerala authorities and police of incompetence and attempts to cover up Liga's murder so as not to scare away tourists. Both the suspects' lawyers asked for and got a postponement by law. They have the right to postpone the case once without giving any reason. The more they postponed, the more he was convinced the case was unclean. However, both suspects were in custody. Investigation revealed that 32-year-old Umesh and 28-year-old Ajakumar offered Liga Scanne weed, and when she was drugged, they used it and then strangled and decapitated her. It is noted that the 2 men apprehended for the murder of Liga Scram had previously committed similar crimes on numerous occasions. Both of them worked for a food delivery company in the Kerala capital and earned money as illegal tour guides in their spare time. Umesh and Udyan have been charged with destruction of evidence, murder, poisoning, kidnapping, and rape. The place where Liga's corpse was found had earlier served as a pleasure ground for Umesh. He used to take men there. 13 criminal cases have been filed against him, including 6 for sexual assault and 1 for attempted murder. Several of Umesh's victims have testified against him. Ligasran, along with both men, were seen in the area by several people. They were initially silent but confessed to everything after the body was found. The detainees confessed to police that they committed the murder while attempting violence. They were apprehended, but had previously claimed that they had only seen Ligasran in Kovalam. The men pleaded guilty after repeated interrogations. On December 6, 2022, the court finally sentenced both men to life in prison. The court also recognized that the criminals must pay compensation to Ligaskin's sister, Ilsa, 65,000 rupees each. We would like to note that there has been a whole series of such crimes in this country recently. Young girls are regularly subjected to violence. The problem of crime in India is very acute. Due to the huge number of sexual acts against minors, the government has introduced the death penalty. It is also worth noting that if the relatives, and primarily Liga's sister, had not been persistent, had they not involved the press by organizing a press conference and an influential MP, it is obvious that the local police would hardly have seriously investigated the case. At first, a theory was put forward that Liga had allegedly passed away voluntarily. And as it now turns out, this is not the first incident in this very place where Liga was found. After this story, I would like to warn once again all women who are frivolous about the dangers of traveling alone in India. Do not seek spiritual enlightenment in distant, dangerous, and uncharted countries. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.